For nearly 1,500 years, one of the most important instruction manuals in history was just gone. And I'm not talking about a guide to building an aqueduct or winning a battle. This was the step-by-step playbook for how to become a Christian back in the 4th century, and it was delivered by one of its most famous voices, John Chrysostom. So today, we're cracking open that lost manual.
And what you find right away is that this was a world of secrets. We tend to think of modern religion as this open book, but back then, in the early church, the most sacred rituals, the absolute heart of the faith, were deliberately kept under wraps, hidden from outsiders. So what on earth were they protecting?
These talks weren't just your average sermons. They were called the baptismal Catecheses, basically a series of final instructions given to candidates right before they were initiated. And here's the key. They were spoken, not written down and passed around. So after the Roman Empire started to crumble, they just vanished. And for centuries, that left this huge gap in what we knew about what it actually felt like to join this faith.
And the story of how we got him back is like this incredible historical puzzle. So, Chrysostom gives these talks around 390 AD, right? Then silence for centuries. It's not until 1718 that a scholar finds and publishes the first two. A couple hundred years go by, and then boom, 1909, 3 more pop up from a lost manuscript. But the real breakthrough comes in 1955, when a priest named Antoine Wenger stumbles upon a final set of 8 in a monastery on Mount Athos. Just like that, after 1,500 years, the complete instruction manual was back in our hand.
Okay, so to really get what's in these instructions, we have to understand the community they were for. The church in 4th century Antioch wasn't just one big, happy family. No, it was sharply divided into 2 groups. You had the insiders and you had the outsiders.
On one side, you had the catechumens. Think of them as the learners, the apprentices. They could come to the first part of the service, hear the sermon, but then they were dismissed, literally asked to leave. On the other side were the pistoi, the faithful, the initiated. They were the only ones who got to stay for the most sacred part of the whole thing, the Eucharist. Becoming a Christian meant crossing that very clear, very real line.
And this whole practice, it actually had a name, the Disciplina Arcana, which basically means the discipline of the secret. The thinking was, you couldn't possibly grasp the deepest mysteries of the faith without the right preparation. Revealing them too early would be like telling someone the huge twist at the end of a movie before they'd even seen the opening credits. It wouldn't just spoil it, it would make it feel cheap.
So, what was going on in this secret school? Well, Chrysostom's instructions really boiled down to this one radical idea: transformation. For him, baptism wasn't just some symbolic ritual. It was a total, complete rebirth.
Here was his big point. Sin wasn't just a mistake you made, like a parking ticket. It was something that had fundamentally damaged your very nature. So just being forgiven wasn't enough. You didn't need a quick fix. You needed to be completely remade from the ground up. And that's where he brings in this amazing metaphor. He tells the candidates to picture a beautiful golden statue that's been left out for years, and now it's covered in rust, smoke, and dirt. You can't just wipe it clean, right? So what do? You stick it in a foundry. The fire melts it all down, burns away every last bit of grime, and then it's recast, brand new, more brilliant than ever. That, he said, is what baptism does to the soul. The water is the foundry, and the Spirit is the fire.
But before this whole recreation could happen, there was this one critical moment, a point of no return. The candidate had to make a solemn, binding vow, basically a legal contract with God that cut them off from their entire old life.
And this was the line they had to say: "I renounce you, Satan, your pomp, your service, and your works." Chrysostom treated this moment like it was a marriage vow or testimony in a courtroom. This wasn't just some nice prayer, it was a legal declaration. You were officially breaking a contract with one power and signing on with a new one.
So what did that actually mean for people? What was this pomp of Satan they had to give up? Well, it wasn't some abstract theological idea. It was a list of very real, very popular, and very specific things you had to quit cold turkey. Chrysostom spells it all out. Satan's pomp? That was the world of the Roman theater and the bloody spectacles at the circus, the obsession with horse races. It was all the everyday superstitions, thinking it was a bad omen to see a certain person first thing in the morning. It was checking your horoscope, wearing amulets for good luck, using magical charms. To become a Christian, you had to walk away from all of it.
So after you've made this huge vow, after all the secret instructions, you were finally ready for the main event, the absolute climax of the entire journey, the baptism itself.
And the whole thing unfolded in these very precise steps. First, you were anointed with oil, like an athlete getting ready for a competition. Then you'd formally declare your new faith. Next came the triple immersion in water, a super powerful symbol of dying to your old self and rising again. And finally, the kiss of peace. This was it. This was the moment you knew you were no longer an outsider. You were family. You were now one of the insiders who knew the secrets.
So why does any of this matter to us today? Why do these ancient texts, rediscovered after all this time, still feel so potent? I think it's because they give us this rare window into a world that demanded total, all-in commitment.
You know, the introduction to a modern Italian translation of these texts puts it perfectly. It says that even after so many centuries, Chrysostom's voice still feels fresh and inspires this deep sense of trust. When you read his words, you can hear the passion and the absolute conviction of a leader guiding his people through something truly life-altering.
And really, that leaves us with a final thought, doesn't it? In our world today, we're surrounded by endless choices and pretty low-stakes commitments. Chrysostom School for New Christians shows us a time when joining a community meant making a radical, public, and irreversible break with your past. It just makes you wonder, what does that level of total, all-in commitment to an idea, any idea, even look like for us today?